Hey, today we're looking at the top 3 new decks of the week. Hey everybody, it's time for the song that you love so much. But also as part of this series, you may not know this, we look at decks as well every single week. And honestly, I got a levels with you. Ever since the Pro Tour wrapped up, this week has been kind of a wasteland of red decks, whether it's mono red or cutter. Those appear to be the decks doing well in leagues and challenges for the most part. But that said, there's some good news today because a challenge this week actually produced a deck that got both first and second place and is kind of brand new. Didn't really show up at the Pro Tour or anything like that. So there is, in fact, a new challenger. And we'll get to it towards the end of the video. But we're going to start this week with Yuna. Now, the interesting thing about this deck is that we've actually already covered a Yuna deck this season. Last week we did Abzan Yuna, if you remember, with the Overlords, especially the Overlord of the Bale Merc. That's why you play black. It looked like a pretty cool deck. But this week we got a standard challenge player get 18th place, which I know doesn't sound amazing, but it's still better than 15 other players at the event. So we're talking about something, right? On Yuna. And cool thing about this is that when we covered Abzan Yuna last week, there was a commenter that said, I think the Naya deck is a little bit better. It's got Overlord of the Boiler Bilges and a couple of tricks up its sleeve. And that commenter was proven to know a little bit what they were talking about, right? We got Naya Yuna showing up in a standard challenge here and doing better than about half the field, slightly less than half the field. I'm saying, when you see a cool deck, you got to latch onto it sometimes. In case you haven't seen Yuna herself yet, you probably have, but this is the 5-mana lady from Final Fantasy. They can get back enchantments from your graveyard, but she also gives them a bunch of abilities. Among them, Ward, which is pretty good for making sure you keep those guys out, but it also gives them Trample and Lifelink. Yuna also has all these abilities, at least during your turn, which is really cool. There's got to be a way to leverage that, right? Well, last week we saw Overlord of the Bale Merc putting a bunch of creatures in our graveyard and such, but this week we've got a little bit more of an aggressive build, which I like to see. You've got not only Yuna, Hope of Spirit, but also Overlord of the Boiler Bilges, which is what that commenter was on about last week. And I think this is a pretty sweet little card right here to play in this deck. It's a great reanimation target. It kills most things in the format right now that you might have to worry about, and sometimes it just goes face. It's huge. It's awesome. But deck also plays Screaming Nemesis, interesting 3-drop play, and Fear of Missing Out, which fuels the Yuna in a way that I really like that the Abzan deck doesn't have access to. But obviously Yuna can get this back card too if it needs to. I like that. But really interesting couple of includes in this deck are first Joshua Phoenix's Dominant. So a 3-mana 3/4, and then when it comes into play, you discard up to 2 cards and then you draw that many cards. So this functions as kind of a reanimator piece, right? We can pitch cards to our graveyard, get them back with Yuna. That seems pretty cool. But it's also got this thing on it where for 5 mana we exile it, return it to the battlefield transformed, and we're going to get Phoenix Warden of Fire. So on the first couple of chapters of this 4/4 flying lifelink guy, we get to just do 2 damage to each opponent. It has lifelink, so we'll get some life back from that. But on chapter 3, we return any number of creatures with total power, or mana value rather, 6 or less from our graveyard to the battlefield, and then exile this and bring it back as Josh. Again, I love there's a magic card just called Josh. But we bring it back as Josh. So we will get the discard 2, draw 2 again, which I think is pretty cool. But interesting thing about this is that 6 mana value means that we can get back Overlord of the Boiler Bilges with Joshua's, back half ability. We can get back Yuna. That's kind of nice. We can get back a Screaming Nemesis and a Fear of Missing Out at the same time, which is probably pretty decent too. So a lot of cool stuff about like the basic package of creatures in the deck and sort of how they all work together. Screaming Nemesis is just very good. It's a very, very good magic card, so it gets to be here, and it works very well with Fear of Missing Out and other stuff. Just fantastic card. But note, dude, does it work? I was thinking it might work with Joshua in some way, but not necessarily, just getting it back. But in any case, I like that the Phoenix is a 4/4 flying lifelink that blocks a lot of aggro stuff pretty well. Brick walls some aggro decks. If it gets in for attacks, it gains you some of that life back, and it gains you some life back automatically just by flipping over in the first place. So a lot of cool stuff about Josh in a Yuna deck. I kind of like the synergy between these two. But another new card they're using is Esper Origins over here. It's really, really cool, man. We all on this channel like this card. This is just 2 mana for Surveil 2, gain 2. So it puts stuff into your graveyard for the unit to get out later, but it too can then come out of your graveyard for 4 mana and be a 4/4 that usually draws a card, ramps, and I like the ramp on here, especially when you've got cards like Yuna and Joshua that you're trying to flip over. And then this other ability, other creatures you control get +2/+2 and trample until end of turn. That's good with any enchantments you may have brought back. It's good with the Screaming Nemesis. It's pretty good if you can line it up with Joshua while he's got like flying and lifelink. So some really, really cool stuff you can do with that. Double attack triggers with Fear of Missing Out, or at least, double attack steps with Fear of Missing Out. And that +2/+2 and trample, that's probably halfway decent too. So cool stuff here too. Oh, and Fear of Missing Out can also, people always complain about these sagas only having like one attack turn. You know what I mean? Which makes plenty of sense. It is a thing to fuss about. But if you've got a Fear of Missing Out, you kind of get 2 attack steps with your 4/4 flying lifelink. So not bad. But I just really like Esper Madeline in here, the old Esper Origins. It gains you a little bit of life back. There's a couple of things in the deck that can do that, and that'll keep you in the fight against aggro. But so will Lightning Helix, gain you a little bit of life. Interesting card against the aggro decks right now, and a couple of copies of Get Lost for clean removal. But we've also got High Noon, a cool little loop with Yuna here. That this deck, again, has available to it that most other Yuna decks don't, is that it can play High Noon, shut off the cutter decks. This is very good against the cutter decks right now, and a number of other things. They can get mana from Vivi, but they can't really spend it, right? So, like that about it. But you can pay the 5 mana to Lightning Axe, Lava Axe your opponent, to Lava Axe your opponent, and then just get it back with Yuna. And then do it again, and then get it back with Yuna, and do it again, and that's really, really cool. But Elder Dragon War over here is another one that, we can basically get back a sweeper anytime that we want to against the smaller decks. This kills a lot of the stuff in aggro right now, but it too allows us to discard cards for Yuna, get them back. It creates a large dragon, and we just get it back with Yuna again. We can read ahead, get the dragon again if that's what we want to do. So again, just really cool synergy with Yuna here. And this allows us to play 2 cards in our Enchantments Matter deck, basically, because of Yuna. That shut down aggro, right? Like, this kills a lot of the stuff in mono red and cutter right now. And High Noon makes it to where, you kind of stunt their growth a little bit. So a lot of cool stuff about these 2 cards in this deck as well. 26 lands in here, as you might expect a relatively high land count, but Quarry Mountain Monastery's in here as well. Kind of help us draw some cards. But apart from that, we've got a sideboard in this deck. We fill out the playset of Esper Origins, interestingly. I'm not sure if this comes in specifically against aggro. I really don't, but it would be an interesting call. But Ghost Vacuum's in here as well to deal with the Omniscience decks and such. You've got Devout Decree and Destroy Evil. So if you need to destroy an enchantment, you can, but you can destroy any number of important black or red creatures with Devout Decree or Destroy Evil. You've got some cool calls like Overwhelming Surge here, 3 mana for an instant, choose one or both. It deals 3 to a creature or destroy a non-creature artifact. So blow up the Monk and the Quarry Steel Cutter that's attached to it. That's a pretty cool play, but you can also blow up the cutter in a mouse or whatever you're trying to do. I think it's a neat call. But Heritage Reclamation is 2 mana for a disenchant that can also exile a card from a yard. So blow up target Quarry Steel Cutter or remove target Omniscience from the yard while an effect is on the stack, Blaze Awakening or Reenact the Crime or something. So pretty cool stuff here too. This shuts down a couple of the most important decks in the format. Pyroclasm blows up a bunch of small creatures. Another Screaming Nemesis in here. Sheltered by Ghost, a cool lifelink option for decks that don't have a lot of removal at their disposal. And then Summon Bahamut. I really have no clue why this comes in. Really, I don't know what this is good against, you know what I mean? But maybe if you're playing a deck that has a lot of diverse permanent types or permanent types you otherwise can't really wipe, then maybe it's good. But I guess it's just it's boarded out. It's like pre-boarded out, right? Because there's a lot of aggro in the format. You don't want a 9 mana card in your deck against most aggro matchups. So, if you don't see a mountain on the other side of the table in game 1, then you're probably a little bit more safe to side this in, I suppose. But neat little board. I guess it's in there because I had an extra slot, and Bahamut's an awesome play with Yuna. But cool deck overall. I shouldn't have to tell you, I really, really like this build of Yuna. And as much as I think that Overlord of the Baelmerk is a great call for an Abzan Yuna pile, at the end of the day, I think that this one actually has more synergy and more just cool cards I want to play in it. So definitely a shout out here to the player on this deck. Let me make sure that I remember their name. Yeah, Unagi Eel, because I wanted to call them Unagi eel for a while, but then I realized that this is how words work. It's Unagi eel. So good job Unagi eel on your Yuna build. I think it's really cool. But next is Golgari Weapon, 4th place in the same standard challenge on June 21st by Cabeza de Bozo, or Debolo, Debozo, the head of a fool. No, it's Cabeza de Bolo up there. So the cool thing about this Golgari Graveyard deck is that it plays 3 copies of Diamond Weapon, a card that I just was not too sure about, but if there is a home for it, it was obviously this deck. So good job, all things considered. Why are we not in dark mode anymore? That's what I want to know. I'm sorry, dark mode people. What happened? What if I do this? Yeah, apparently that just works. I'm a genius. But all right, so in case you haven't seen Diamond Weapon yet, this is 9 mana, ostensibly, but not really, for an 8/8 legendary elemental artifact creature with reach that costs 1 less to cast for each permanent in your graveyard. It also has immune. It just doesn't take combat damage. Prevent all combat damage will be dealt with this guy. So blocks everything with the reach, right, and doesn't take combat damage. Pretty stalwart dude, but that's the only keyword ability that he's got. So he can't trample over. He doesn't have like menace or anything that would really help him out in combat. So he has kind of the same problem a lot of these Lurgoyfs have. You know, he doesn't bust through like super well, but usually you cast this guy for just 2 green mana like relatively early in the game, and that's good enough, especially when he triggers up the beanstalk, which is maybe the reason Diamond Weapon's really in the deck to begin with, is that he's just another one of these dudes that cost almost no mana for what you're getting, and triggers beans. And so we'll see if this card gets hit by the hammer on Monday. I'm not convinced absolutely that it will, but we'll have to wait and see, I guess. But you know, if it does, and I'm not sure about this deck in general, because it's really trying to make beans have like the best possible value. But to that end, there's not just Diamond Weapon in the deck. You've seen the rest of this for the most part before. There's Huskburster Swarm in this thing. We got Hollow Marauder is just a 2 of. Often you'd see a bunch of these different guys that only cost 1 mana and they're like 5/5 death touches or whatever. But this deck this build at least doesn't necessarily do all of that. It does have the 2 Hollow Marauder and the 4 Huskburster, but apart from that, there's 4 Gnawing Vermin, 4 Rubble Belt Maverick, 4 Town Greeter, new card, but mills 4 when it comes into play. We've got Overlord of the Balemerc, the strongest new card for this deck in the last few sets. Obviously, mills a lot and just becomes a huge dude. Gets a guy back. Harvester of Misery is a removal spell that can sometimes be a sweeper, right? Just fantastic creatures. But this deck also runs in 2 copies of Carsey Revenant, interestingly. You know, you don't always see this in this deck, but this kind of solves the evasion problem of Lurgoyfs, right? This will give your Diamond Weapon flying, it can get in. This will give the Swarm flying, it'll get in. This will give Souls of the Lost, another oft-played creature in this deck, the flying, and that really, really helps kind of bust through in this meta right now. So pretty cool. I imagine a deck like this could get, especially with cards like Diamond Weapon, Souls of the Lost. These don't care about like creatures in your yard, they care about permanents in your yard. So that's a huge difference. And you're more than willing to exile a Carsey Revenant and get 1 less count on a Souls of the Lost or something. If you can give it flying lifelink, sometimes that's all it really takes. So cool creature base here. They did a couple of things you don't see every single day in these builds, and Diamond Weapon is brand new. Apart from that, the 4 beans and the 4 overwhelming remorse. I think I kept calling this overwhelming response in a dank jank pretty recently. It's overwhelming remorse. And it's a great card that is about to rotate out. But even after it rotates, we can probably still find some sort of replacement for it. But as it is, it's actually one of the better reasons to play the deck. 1 mana to exile basically any creature or planeswalker is a great deal. Next, though, in the sideboard, we've got the Cutdowns, Dreams of Steel and Oil, Duress. We're used to seeing these recently. Garruk's Uprising is a 1 of. This will draw you some cards because most of your creatures are huge. If you need a 5th copy of Beans, it's basically that. Scavenging Ooze can mess around with Omniscience decks. Heritage Reclamation, 2nd time seeing this card in the video, but also Haywire Might to do some similar things. We've got Glissa Sunslayer in here for when we're trying to attack. And I don't know, I guess this could brick wall some aggro decks too. Scrap Shooter for taking out again, you know, artifacts, enchantments and such. Sheldred, the Apocalypse, pretty cool against aggro when you can land it, and then Tear Asunder to blow up anything and blows up cutters, very importantly. So sideboard makes a lot of sense here, but for the most part, this deck is all about the creature base, and I think it leverages Diamond Weapon really well. I'm glad to see this card in some decks so early in the season, but First place after we let the chicken out. Chicken, come here. Chicken, come here. Come here. Here she is. Will you come up here? Will you jump up here with your father? Will you do that? Come here. Jeez Louise. This lady. You know what I mean? We're done after this deck, and then we can go out together, babe. But anyway, we're going to look at the surprise hit of the week, everybody. The true sauce. And if you thought that you were done with Vivi, you know what I mean? Like, Pro Tour's over, maybe Vivi gets banned, probably not. It's a brand new card from a hype set. They are trying to sell packs. It's maybe the chase rare from the set that I think Gavin's like really the most proud of. He loves that card. He's gone on record. But anyway, I don't think that Vivi gets banned. I'll see you in a second, chicken. That said, if something like Rage or Cutter gets banned, we do still have to deal with this deck. This is It Cauldron, and now we're in dark mode, baby. So Karate Dum is the deck that I went with here, but actually 2 players ended up in first and second place in a standard challenge this week with this deck, which is really, I think, a real statement. You know, you just come in out of nowhere. You came in like a wrecking ball, like Miley Cyrus, and just first and second place in a challenge is really, I think, something to talk about. So you see some of the creatures on screen. We'll get to those in a second. This is actually an Agathas Cauldron deck. 4 copies of Soul Cauldron here, but it is not the typical Soul Cauldron deck. You know, often you see some kind of extremely wacky combo, and this deck can get up to some nonsense, but mostly it is Agathas Soul Cauldron, which allows, you know, other creatures you control to have the activated abilities of cards you've exiled with it. And we're going to play some Vivi. It's mostly what we're doing. Now, we are playing Voldaren Thrillseeker in the deck as a 3-of. This is another great card with Cauldron. You know, if you can give any creature this ability, then your opponent will be dead pretty quick. You know, but Vivi over here is another just incredible Cauldron, you know, activated ability to just be passing around to all your homies. It's ridiculous how good this card can be with Cauldron. It's something that I talked about a little bit in the preseason, but wasn't sure what actually happened. Maybe it's a little bit slow. Maybe especially Cauldron is too slow right now in a deck format full of aggro. But again, first and second place in the same challenge. It really, I think, is a great, you know, proof of concept in and of itself. Vivi seems really, really good if you can give any of your creatures his abilities. So pretty sick. You know, you got Tersalite Shatter in here to kind of fuel your Agatha Soul Cauldron shenanigans and discard stuff to it. Marauding Mako, you know, you're going to be discarding a lot of cards, so it's cool to be able to get on board turn 1 with a creature that will be relatively big before too long. Another 4 copies of Fear of Missing Out. I feel like that is a lot of total copies just in this video. You know, but between this and the Terra deck last week, I think that's like 12 total copies in 6 decks that we've looked at in the series so far this season. So Fear of Missing Out's pretty good when you get that synergy going, obviously. And then, of course, again, Voldaren Thrillseeker. She's so good. I will not bear I cannot stand the thought of this lady rotating. Really, I love this lady. But apart from that, Winter Night Story is another relatively new card. This one from Tarkir Dragonstorm. This is good in the Cauldron decks because it fuels your Cauldron. You can discard some cards. Obviously, you want to discard a creature card anyway. That makes the card a little bit better. And you can harmonize it pretty easily, too, to keep the shenanigans going. And the Glacial Dragon Hunt, again, discard cards. Discard cards, buddy. So, Dragon Hunt, Winter Night Stories, and Tersalite Shatter, and Fear of Missing Out. These all discard stuff. So, Mako gets bigger. You've got targets for your Agatha Soul Cauldron. Very cool. A Braid in the main deck to take out cutters and creatures. Into the Flood Maw to get a little bit of tempo, because that's all this deck really needs, you know. Eventually, it'll be able to just go off, you know, and it needs some breathing room to do that. Flood Maw's good for that. Spell Pierce, again, for the Cutter decks and for the Vivi decks and just in general. Very good card right now. And Prophecydetic Memory as a 4-of in this deck. Draws a card when it comes into play, is a non-creature for stuff like Vivi and whatnot. And deck has a lot of ways of drawing cards in it, or a fair number of ways of drawing cards. It works with Tersalite Shatter and it curves well with Tersalite Shatter, I should say. So kind of doing some good stuff about this thing in this deck. And obviously it's great with Vivi, because if you just put +1/+1 counters on Vivi, you'll draw a bunch of cards and Vivi will get huge. So pretty cool, you know, synergy there as well. But synergizes with Thrillseeker too. You know, you make your creatures larger and you just throw them at your opponent. So cool card having this deck for sure. But Apart from that, 22 lands has to be reasonably low here. We're fitting a lot of weird stuff into the main, but the sideboard is another Abrade to deal with the cutters. You know, you've got a Draconautics Engineer in here. That's another good activated ability to pass around. Enduring Curiosity is a 2-of, draws a lot of cards, good with Prof's Eidetic Memory, good if we're not up against aggro decks, so we're more likely to get in there and we need the cards. Lithomantic Barrage, for obvious reasons. Every deck with mountains tends to play Lithomantic Barrage somewhere on the board. 2 negates, because just like we have mountains, we play Barrage. We have islands, so we'll play negate. Scorching Shot is in here to take out, you know, Bizas, Sheldreds, especially post-board. You'll see more Sheldreds post-board. Spell Pierce for, again, obvious reasons, and then Unable to Scream for the Magebane Lizards and the Manifold Mice and stuff like that. So altogether, pretty solid sideboard that borrows some from the cutter deck, but not all. You know, we've got stuff like Draconautics Engineer and Enduring Curiosity to kind of set ourselves apart from those boards, right? But altogether, really, really cool deck here. You know, I know not everybody will think so. It's got the Vivies in it. Everyone's hating on that card right now. But anytime you see a successful Soul Cauldron deck, I kind of pop a little bit. I'm happy for that. And, you know, we saw not just 2 successful Soul Cauldron decks today, or this week, but, you know, basically the same exact build, first and second place. And again, I just really think that that's worth talking about. You know, this is not the kind of deck that we've sort of seen in the last couple of months. So we'll see, depending on what gets banned on Monday, whether or not the Beanstalk deck can still hang, you know, if it can still even exist. We'll see if the Vivi decks can be a thing. I really don't think they banned that card, but, you know, altogether, it's nice that we got such a saturated with, you know, Cutter and Mono Reds for a Pro Tour. But over here in the challenges, they're still kind of grinding it out with some sort of, not necessarily janky decks, but some new, some fresh stuff. It's always good to see. But anyway, y'all, that is it for this week. I'll be back next week, probably. I mean, that's how I like to do things. It's the name of the series. So I'll see you guys then. Do all the YouTube stuff on your way out. Hit the like button. It's the one shaped like a thumb. Can't miss it. Hit the subscribe button. I think I need 13 subscribers to get to the next 1,000. So help me out with that. You can also check out the Patreon, $1 a month to vote on content around here and deck techs and whatnot. And apart from that, that's it. That's Itski Lewitsky, and that is all Ski Kowalski. So I will catch you cats later. I'm Dev from the Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love and be kind.